How's everyone doing? Hi, my name is Seneca. I am the lead park ranger at Women's Rights National Historical Park. Welcome to Convention Days 2024 Revolutionary Families. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of Honor Wilson, our superintendent, it's a great pleasure to have this event here. Welcome everyone here. It's a fantastic day, beautiful day for all of us. Today we are joined by two presenters to talk about Rooted in Revolution. Our first presenter is Judith Wellman of the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse Museum. But more than that, she is also the principal investigator on Historic New York Research Association. She's a retired professor emerita from SUNY Oswego. She's the president of the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse Museum. For us, very special, she is the first and former historian of the Women's Rights National Historical Park. So super exciting to have her here for that. She'll be joined by Dave Bruinix, who is the site manager of the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse Museum, and a retired middle school history teacher, and descendant of early Quakers from the Farmington Meetinghouse. Following our presentation, if you'd like to join us, it's kind of neat. We didn't really plan on this. It's going to happen, but this year is also the 20th anniversary of the Road to Seneca Falls, written by Judith Wellman. She'll be signing copies in the Visitor Center if anyone would like. She'll probably also sign other things too, I'm sure. Anything like that. So please take advantage. Please, she'll be there for about 30 minutes after the presentation to sign any books and things like that. And there is a whole exhibit about the Quaker Meetinghouse in the Visitor Center today as well. So a lot of other neat things going on today too, so please join us for all of that. And with further ado, let's turn it over to Dr. Judith Wellman.
Can everyone hear okay? It is such an honor to be here today in this wonderful place. It is the 176th anniversary of the Women's Rights Convention, and there are people celebrating all over the country, but we are in the place that it really happened. And it is an honor to have you all here to help commemorate this. If you're like me, you may be looking around and kind of hearing the echoes of people who were here before us, and I can almost see like Jane Hunt sitting back there with her 3-week-old baby girl, and the whole McClintock family is here, including Elizabeth, who helped really organize this whole convention. Frederick Douglass is here, really noticeable because he's very tall and he's also black. Traditionally, we thought he was the only black person here, but there were a lot of other black people living in Seneca Falls, and I think they were also here, including Thomas James, who probably brought his wife Sarah and his 10-year-old daughter Martha. Thomas James was a barber, and he had escaped from slavery in Maryland, and he lived down here on State Street. His house is still standing. And he was also a trustee of this Wesleyan chapel, along with Joshua Wright, who was another black barber who had escaped from Maryland. And I think we begin to see the nuances of people who came if we start to look carefully at who probably was here. There were 300 people here. We know that because Amelia Bloomer said she came Thursday night and had to sit up in the balcony because there wasn't any space on the floor. Only 100 of them signed the Declaration of Sentiments. We'll talk a bit about some of those today. The theme today and the topic that my compatriot and I, Dave Bruinix, have chosen is Rooted in Revolution, Quaker Families, Equal Rights, and the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse. And this is dedicated to all people who work for equality and justice, not only in the past, but in the present. And that includes you all, because you are here today making a statement about the importance of what happened here and these values to all of us. A lot of the historical information here comes from a book I did write on the Seneca Falls Convention, and Don reminded me it was 20 years old. I've totally not forgotten that. And also from a historic structure report that we did in 2017 for the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse. This talk is basically divided into two big parts. One is about these Quaker families. Why were they so important for this Seneca Falls Convention? And how did their family structure support their commitment to these ideals of equality? And the second topic really relates to the Farmington Meetinghouse and how those families helped carry out their ideals of equal rights in that building. And then we'll take a bit of a look about what happened after the Civil War to the Meetinghouse and what's going on with it right now. I want to thank all the board members from the 1816 Meetinghouse who are here. Do you want to raise your hands if you're a board member? Thank you so much for being here. We do have a table with information in the visitor center if you'd like to see it. So why were these Quaker families so important to this convention? Most of you probably know that right here in this building where you are sitting, there was the first Women's Rights Convention initiating the organized women's rights movement in the country and the world, July 19th and 20th. Oh, look, here is Frederick Douglass. Thank you for being here. 100 people here signed the Declaration of Sentiments, 32 of them men, 68 women. It was patterned, as most of you know, after the Declaration of Independence, except instead of all men are created equal, they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. And that statement was followed by 17 statements of grievances of women against the patriarchal establishment, which included demands for equality in all the areas we're still working on, which are jobs, politics, religion, law, personal respect, family issues. So that document remains very fresh and vibrant, and there are little copies of it in the visitor center. If you don't have one, get it and carry it around. About one quarter of those signers were Quakers affiliated with Genesee Yearly Meeting of Friends, which was an annual meeting that incorporated 25 monthly meetings of Quakers from around western New York and upper Canada. So it was a transnational meeting, and they met every June in the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the catalyst for this convention, and she got the idea based on her own personal experience, her experience as a lawyer with her father in the law office, her experience as an abolitionist with her cousin Garrett Smith and her husband, Henry Brewster Stanton, and her friend Lucretia Mott. But she didn't work alone. Local Quakers, especially people from Junius Monthly Meeting of Friends in what's now Waterloo, and members of the McClintock family helped transform this idea of a convention into action. In 1855, Elizabeth Cady Stanton decided she was going to write a history of the women's rights movement. This is 7 years after the Seneca Falls Convention. So she asked Lucretia Mott for help, and Mott wrote back and said, I've never liked being called the moving spirit of the convention, when to thyself and the McClintocks belong the honor. All the McClintock family, including the 5 kids, were probably sitting where you're sitting today, right now, right next to you. In 1848, on July 9th, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was invited to a gathering at the home of Jane and Richard Hunt. And here's what their house looked like then. It's now got columns since 1923, still standing. It's owned by Women's Rights Park. And this is where the idea was first hatched. There were 4 other people at that meeting. They were all Quaker women, including Lucretia Mott, who was here with her husband James, who was chairing the convention that day. From Philadelphia, Jane Hunt is in the middle. She had just had a baby, 2 weeks old. Mary Ann McClintock, who was a Quaker from Waterloo, lived in the house that the park also owns, and Martha Wright from Auburn, who was Lucretia Mott's sister. And there, said Stanton, she found sympathetic ears, and in her autobiography she says, I poured out The torrent of my long accumulating discontent was such vehemence and indignation that I stirred myself, as well as the rest of the party, to do and dare anything. What they dared to do might seem quite tame to us today, but it was to call a convention. And they took a notice to the Seneca County Courier. It appeared the next Tuesday. And it was not a convention for peace. It wasn't a convention for temperance. It wasn't a convention for abolitionism. It was a convention solely to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women. On Sunday, Stanton visited the McClintock family in Waterloo. She said to concoct a declaration. She took the train, got there at 10 o'clock, and they sat down in the parlor and started to work. Stanton is often considered to be the author of the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments, and using the Declaration of Independence as a model, but she's always credited one in the circle at the McClintock house with getting that idea. As she said, after much delay, and they looked at statements from peace, temperance, abolitionist societies, they all seemed too tame and pacific for the inauguration of a rebellion such as the world has never seen, she said. But after a delay, one in the circle took up the Declaration of 1776 and read it aloud with much spirit and emphasis, and it was at once decided to adopt the historic document with some slight changes. Instead of 17 grievances against King George, we get the 17 grievances that are currently in the document. So how did Quaker family structure support this kind of commitment to egalitarian ideals? Equality is a core American value. Most of us are very aware that Thomas Jefferson, operating from a secular tradition, quoting John Locke, wrote the Declaration of Independence. You probably know these words by heart. You can say them with me if you'd like to. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the core beginning of the United States of America, and it seems really important to remind us of what it says. We still struggle with what that means, but we do struggle. For Quakers, they were part of that new American Republic, but their commitment to equality was enhanced and promoted by their spiritual beliefs. And they often quoted biblical passages such as, in Christ there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. They often quoted George Fox, who was the founder of Quakerism, walk cheerfully over the earth, answering that of God in everyone, and they meant everyone. Quaker families reflected those egalitarian, spiritually based ideals. And one of the ways they did it was by the fact that women were not just wives in Quaker families, but they were also important sisters. If we look at emerging middle-class family ideals, some of you may have heard of them called the cult of domesticity, it emphasized women as wives, and families were nuclear families, parents and kids. Families were havens from the chaotic, competitive outside world. Women played roles as caregivers. Women were the moral, virtuous ones. Men were the individualistic, competitive, do what you have to do to survive in the outside world. And the dominant dyad, as we might call them, was the husband-wife bond. That's what made the family. And if you look at that, we know that every lawyer had on his shelf the 4 volumes of William Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. Blackstone said by marriage, the husband and wife are one person. Isn't that sweet? Except one person was the husband. The wife had no legal existence at all. And you begin to see the way in which it sustains in the dominant culture a kind of dominant submission model of gender relationships. For Quaker families, emphasizing not only marriage, They usually had very happy marriages, but the role of women as sisters also counterbalanced that. And it did reflect an earlier family pattern which was dominant in Revolutionary America and which survived in rural families into the present in some cases. And it was quite different from that model of the nuclear extended urban merging family. Extended families with generations, more than 2 generations, often people who weren't related biologically to the parents were in the household as family members. They were part of the larger world, not something you retreated to from the world, but they reached out to the larger world and incorporated it. And women were caregivers, but they were also providers. Men were breadwinners, but they were also virtuous citizens in the world. They were expected to behave in moral ways. And the dominant dyads in those families, it wasn't just a husband-wife bond inherently unequal, but it was balanced by a sister-brother, sister-sister bond, which was inherently an equal relationship. And they functioned outside to kind of undercut and balance that dominant dyad of husband-wife in the larger society. One example is the McClintock family. And here are the names of all 11 of this extended family network. Thomas and Mary Ann McClintock were husband and wife. Jane and Richard Hunt were husband and wife. They were connected by a marriage that Richard had for his third wife, who was Thomas McClintock's niece. The brother-sister bonds were Mary Ann McClintock's half-sister was Margaret Pryor, whose son was George Pryor. Richard Hunt had 2 sisters, Hannah Plant and Lydia Mount. The parent-child relationship is obviously from the McClintocks and the Hunts. And Richard Hunt also had a niece, Mary Dale. All 11 of those people signed the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments. It's like more than a third of the people who signed with that one extended family network. And they're going to be extremely important, not only in organizing the Seneca Falls Convention, but in working with the 1816 Meetinghouse. So how did these Quaker families carry out these ideas of equal rights in the 1816 Meetinghouse? Thomas McClintock was clerk of Genesee Yearly Meeting of Friends from 1838 to 1842. And that's the period when the commitment to reform just exploded among Quakers in Genesee Yearly Meeting who met here. The issues they worked on in terms of equal rights were basically 3. One was for Native Americans, 1 African Americans, and 1 women. Native Americans after the Revolution, everywhere in the East Coast, East area, were subject to the threat of removal, loss of land, removal to west of the Mississippi. It hit home powerfully in 1838 with the Treaty of Buffalo Creek, which mandated that all Haudenosaunee people had to move west of the Mississippi and lose all of their ancestral lands. It was patterned on the Cherokee move that some of you are probably familiar with the Trail of Tears, which 8,000 Cherokee people walked from the southeastern United States, Cherokee, Choctaw Creek, etc., to Oklahoma, and many of them died. The Senecas saw this, and they said, no, we're not going. They refused to leave. Senecas appealed to Quakers through the Tonawanda Senecas. The Quakers formed what they called a Joint Committee on Indian Affairs that included representatives from Genesee Yearly Meeting, Philadelphia, New York, and Baltimore Yearly Meeting. So it was a national effort. And they hired a man named Griffith Cooper, who was an enrolled minister in the Farmington Meetinghouse, and whose house is still standing, he and Liza, who's also active in the Underground Railroad, to be their agent with the Seneca and to organize white resistance on behalf of the Seneca Nation. It wasn't the nation yet, sorry. They met in council June 17th through 19th in the Farmington Meetinghouse in 1840. Seneca leaders spoke, so did Quaker leaders, saying, what can we do? And the Tonawanda Seneca sent a petition. They were so good at writing beautiful, eloquent petitions. We only ask for justice. We love Tonawanda. We have no wish to leave it. It's the land of our fathers. Here we wish to lay our bones in peace. Griffith Cooper and others, including Amy Post, the Rochester Friends, who had helped organize the succeeding meeting to the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention in Rochester 2 weeks later. Peter Wilson was a Cayuga interpreter that worked a lot with Quakers as well. And they began to organize resistance. They visited the president, they visited the Secretary of War, who was John C. Spencer from Canandaigua. They visited William Seward, who was then governor of New York, and they collected petitions from local towns all around this area on behalf of Seneca land rights. They also published a Knock Your Socks Off pamphlet. It's online. I recommend you sit down when you read it. It is a detailed description of what the federal government was doing to try to fraudulently get Seneca people to agree to this treaty. It's called The Case of the Seneca Indians in the State of New York, 1840. Well, the result was a compromise treaty of 1842, and Seneca people kept Allegheny and Cattaraugus. They lost Tonawanda and Buffalo Creek. And Tonawanda made a separate treaty in 1857. So Tonawanda Seneca people are still on the remnants of their homelands today. Another main theme they used to carry out the idea of equality was African American rights in the Underground Railroad. Frances Warden Chesborough, who was a niece of William and Frances Seward, lived in Canandaigua and was herself and her family were active in Underground Railroad activities. She said Farmington was a Quaker settlement on the direct road of the Underground Railroad leading to Canada. The first person we know who came to Farmington was Austin Stewart. He had been born in Virginia, brought enslaved with 70 other people by William Helm to Western New York, where Helm wanted to set up a plantation-style economy. He escaped in 1814, went directly to Farmington, where he lived with the Comstock family, and he wrote a beautiful autobiography published in 1857, and again, it's online if you'd like to read more, and I recommend it. But he said this, and it just struck me because it's so similar to what a Quaker might have said. I've come to the conclusion that God created all men free and equal, placed them upon this earth to do good and benefit each other, and that war and slavery should be banished from the face of the earth. Frederick Douglass came to Farmington many times and spoke in the meeting house. In his last iteration of his autobiography, he described taking a train to Victor, Farmington, Canandaigua, Geneva, Waterloo was the best school possible for me. He said, it obliged me to think and read. It taught me to express my thoughts clearly. I had an audience to speak to every week and must say something worth their hearing. So I think all of these sympathetic, basically white audiences were important in forming Douglass's national and international voice. The Hathaway family in Farmington, there were many families we could point to. This is one example because they got a marker. Their house is maybe a quarter of a mile from the Farmington Meeting House. They clearly kept a safe house on the Underground Railroad. It was J.C. Hathaway and his sister Phoebe Hathaway who were the most active in public things. So again, it's that sibling tie. They organized both men's anti-slavery meetings and women's anti-slavery meetings. They organized the Western New York Anti-Slavery Society, which became a real engine of reform, not just for abolitionism, but also for women's rights. Some of the people who came to Farmington on the Underground Railroad were Mary and Emily Edmondson, who had been captured with 77 enslaved people on a ship called the Pearl in April 1848. They were sent to New Orleans where they were going to be sold as fancy girls. Their dad, Paul, was so horrified, he came north and raised $2,250 to buy his daughters back, and they were like 14 and 16, something like that, out of slavery. They came directly to Farmington, and 5 Quaker women set up a school which is still standing. They call it the Bird's Nest School. One of them was Mariah Wilbur, one of whose descendants is Charles Lenhart, who's sitting over here today. William Wells Brown was another person who lived in Farmington in the mid-1840s. We don't know where he lived, but he had escaped from slavery in Kentucky, worked in Buffalo, came to Farmington and worked as a lecturer for the Western American Slavery Society, and that's where he wrote his autobiography. He went on to become the first African-American playwright. He wrote history books, he wrote travel books, he wrote, I think, 2 more autobiographies, spent a lot of his time in England lecturing, a brilliant man. Most people are familiar with his national and international importance, but almost no one realizes that he lived in Farmington during the crucial beginning years of his writing. One of the most interesting and undiscovered until now families who lived in Farmington were the Selby Howard and Harriet Howard family. They had been born in Maryland. They came to Farmington about 1850. And they are buried in North Farmington Cemetery. Look at the last 3 lines. Born a slave, lived a free man, died in the Lord. This is kind of... and then the third major issue they had was the women's rights movement, which we talked about a bit before. So how did they come to be so quickly sympathetic to Stanton's idea that we should have a women's rights convention? Because they had already been talking about it among themselves and had indicated their commitment to it. They traditionally held separate meetings for women and men, but in traditional Quaker meetings, women's decisions had to be approved by the men's meetings. In 1838, interestingly enough, the first year that Thomas McClintock was clerk of this meeting, they decided to change that. And in their discipline, they said, in accordance with the declaration of the Apostle Paul, that male and female are one in Christ Jesus, the following rules of discipline are to be understood as being alike applicable to both sexes. Men's and women's meetings stand on the equal footing of common interest and common right. This is 10 years before the Seneca Falls Convention. They have put into writing their commitment to the equality of women and men. One of the people who usually came to Genesee Early Meeting was Lucretia Mott. She and her husband James would visit Lucretia Mott's sister Martha Wright in Auburn, and James Mott's brother-in-law William Murray Moore in Rochester, and other Quakers, and they would come to Genesee Early Meeting at the same time. And she would speak on women's rights, women's education, liberal religion. She argued that Christians should be known more by their likeness to Christ than by their notions of Christ. Not all Quakers agreed with these turning reform movements, and splits among those Quakers released their energy into the larger world, as the historian Nancy Hewitt so astutely observed several years ago. June 12, 1848, which is over a month, it's a month and a week before the Seneca Falls Convention, half the people in Genesee Early Meeting, probably 200 people, walked out of the meeting asserting that each individual should have a right to think as well as act for himself and in his own way to assist in rolling on the wheel of reform. That was Daniel Anthony in a letter to his daughter, Susan B. Anthony, who was then teaching in Canandaigua, so she did not come to the Seneca Falls Convention. She was not at Farmington Meeting at that meeting, but the Seneca Falls Convention was a direct result of that split in the Farmington Meeting, because it offered a chance, the first chance any of those Quakers had to get together with other people to say, what have we done? Let's talk about it. And to know that Lucretia Mott, whom everyone trusted, was there and would probably give them some clues about where they should be going and how they should get organized. And so at least a quarter of the people who were here and signed the Declaration of Sentiments were Quakers affiliated with Farmington Meetinghouse. And as we know, their actions changed the world. October 6, 1848, these reformers went back to the 1860 Meeting House to form a new yearly meeting of Congregational Friends. And instead of saying, you have to believe this and this and this, you have to subscribe to these values, they said, what you have to do is be practical, do good in the world. They called it practical philanthropy. Listen continually to the Spirit. They called it ongoing revelation. You can't have someone say, well, they said this 300 years ago, so it must be true. No, what does the Spirit say to you today? Immediate response to divine requiring. If the Spirit tells you you should do something, you should do it, and you should do it now. And interestingly enough, they had men and women meet together. The first time in Quaker tradition and in many other traditions that we know of, that there weren't separate meetings for men and women, but suddenly they were meeting together as they do today. They invited Elizabeth Cady Stanton to give the keynote address at that organizational meeting of Congregational Friends. And she spoke, of course, on women's rights. She also passed around a petition for women's suffrage. Benjamin Hugh, who was a local student at Macedon Academy, said, yep, and I signed it. After she was done, Stanton was very quiet. And Stanton wasn't used to having people sit in silence, as Quakers often did, and she said, oh, they didn't like what I said. And finally, this guy, he was from Waterloo, Julius monthly meeting, stood up, Henry Bunnell, and he said, well, what I think is, if a hen can crow, let her crow. Of course, everyone laughed. He came up afterwards and he said, I didn't mean to raise the laugh on thee. I just meant I think a woman should do whatever she wants to do. The Congregational Friends continued to meet until the mid-1880s. In 1854, they published in Frederick Douglass's paper, thank you, Frederick, this call to the convention, which was held in the Julius Monthly Meeting House on 9-Foot Road in Waterloo. The platform is broad and comprehensive, admitting the most perfect liberty of conscience, an assembly in which Christians, Jews, Mohammedans, and pagans, by which they meant traditional Galileo Seneca people, men and women of all names and no name may labor together for the promotion of human welfare with no other law but the law of love. That statement actually convinced me to become a Quaker. I said, okay, they're my kind of people. In 1866, they became a prototype, a kind of model for the American Equal Rights Association, which was organized to secure equal rights and universal suffrage to all adults, men, women, black, and white, and became the inspiration for the national movement for women's suffrage. Among those who joined the Congregational Friends, besides Frederick Douglass, Lucretia Mott, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Charles Lennox Remote, etc., all these reformers, was Susan B. Anthony. As you know, she was arrested in 1872 for voting the straight Republican ticket, she said. She voted for General Grant. And she was tried in the Canandaigua courthouse in June 1873. Before she did that, she went to every town in Monroe County, and then when they changed the trial to Canandaigua, every town in Ontario County to talk on her speech was, is it a crime for a United States citizen to vote? She came to Farmington to give that talk as well. The response of the judge was, yes, it is a crime for a woman as a citizen to vote. So what happened to the meeting house after the Civil War? And here I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dave Bruinix.
Thank you for coming today. I'm Dave Bruinix. I didn't become a Quaker. I was raised by them and married them. I'm the site manager for the meeting house and retired middle school teacher. After the Civil War, the meeting house, a lot of the people moved out of the area. They maintained the building, but eventually in 1927 was actually sold to a local farmer, John Jack and Blair, who picked up this building and moved it a little over 340 feet down the hill and used it as a potato warehouse for the next 50 years or more. Then it sat and did very little to anything other than decompose. Between a person running into the end of the building and a big windstorm, this is what we came across, and the town of Farmington actually issued a demolition order. It looks a little rough in these pictures. My brother and I climbed down the roof of that and cabled it so that it wouldn't fall over any farther. My mother wasn't very impressed when she found out what we had done, but she was glad we did it. Every aspect of our organization is volunteer. We rely on each other and other local groups, national, statewide, local. Without that, we couldn't do anything. Variety of major government and private donors. Our mission as an organization, the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse Museum preserves, maintains, and interprets the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse as a national site of conscience and a cornerstone of historic movements for equal rights, social justice, and peace, including rights for Native Americans, African Americans, and women, inviting visitors to explore issues of equality and justice in their own lives. Everything we do is part of this mission. Research, interpretation, restoration. We are at a position in our organization where we can hold a lot of events on site. So almost all of them are like this, where we go out into the community and present at different locations. It's nice because it gives us an opportunity to get our word out in a variety of different locales. The restoration, we have most of the building. It's just not where it's supposed to be. We picked up the building and moved it. It's actually in its third location. If you remember, a minute ago I said it was moved in 1927. Recently found photos of it being moved for the first time with horses and logs. We didn't do it that way. The picture on the top right is one of my favorite pictures. That's my son carrying the building down the road all by himself. And then closer to the building, there's a guy in a gray coat with a black hat. That's my dad. And I was trying to take a picture of my son carrying the building, and Charles caught us and got all three of us. So that's actually one of my favorites. I like that a lot, just because it has us. Earlier you saw the end of the building was destroyed. We put it back. It's enclosed now, ready for the next step. This is more or less what it looks like now. We've wrapped it with some metal siding to protect the building a little more so. That's Helen Kirker, our very first president of the organization. What are we doing? We have a nature trail. It starts at the corner of the building and heads down through the woods. It's about a half-mile round trip. It's very nice. It has little islands and peninsulas that you can sit on to rest and reflect and contemplate. Eagle Scouts, if you can find some, they're great to have. They love to build benches. In a quarter mile, we have 9 benches. So 6 of them are not shown in this picture, but the 3 there are actually pressure treated up lumber replicas of original pews from the building. And those are some of the scouts. My mom and dad. Oh, and I'm in that picture. Just enjoying the bench. That's Robin Knoll, one of our board members who couldn't be here today. My mom, my dad. If you go over into the visitor center, we have these portable exhibits. There really is a lot of information on them. And what's really kind of nice, one of our other board members, Bruce Chapman, using some of the lumber from the original building, built a model of the meeting house. It will have siding and windows and things on it. It's about 30 inches. He's super particular. It's so accurate down to minute details. All sorts of different programs. We spoke to that a little bit. Quaker Days. This year we couldn't have one on site. We had it at the other Quaker Meetinghouse, the 1876. A variety of different programs, children's events. So as far as the restoration goes, we're making progress. We've been working on the site plan. Keep reaching for my pointer. This was mostly just approved just this last Wednesday night. A couple minor changes we have to do for final site plan approval. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the background that you can't necessarily see when you're driving down the road, but we're pretty busy. We have electricity. We didn't put it in the building. We set up a construction panel next to it. But O'Connell Electric Company and Graybar Electric Supply actually donated all the materials for it. And Jerry Johnston and his offspring maybe did the install. Jerry's a retired union electrician, and his child wants to learn the process. And he had a lot of fun working with it. They gave us a little over $20,000 worth of materials. And O'Connell Electric didn't have all of it in stock. They're a huge customer of Graybar, so they called Graybar and said, we're going to need you to donate all this. So that was kind of a nice thing for them to do. When we have the building ready, one half of it will be as it was. The other half, think of it more as a flex space so we can do different events. We can run a program like this. Geothermal, parking lots, walkways, lots of signs. The committee building, the little wing that comes off the side there, when John Bandler moved the main building north down the hill, he moved the committee building south down the hill, and his daughters lived in it, Rulia and Phyllis Bandler. They always I knew them when I was growing up, and they reminded me of the two sisters on the Wellmans that made the special recipe. That'll be our office space, meeting room, archives, little gift shop. We're putting in a parking lot. We brought in 60 truckloads of millings, which is a ground up road. And that's the road right next to our building. And they should be working on it right now today. When Judith was talking a little while ago about Selby Howard, one of the neat things that's going on right now as we speak is there's an archaeological dig going on at this, what we believe to be the site of his last residence, a cabin in the woods not too very far from it. So I'm excited to see where that goes. So if you take a picture of this, it'll give you all of our social medias, websites, and otherwise. We do have red cards on our table in the other room. And I thank you very much for having us today. You're not free yet. Okay. That's the conclusion of our program. Thank you so much. Let's give one more round of applause. We want to get a quick offer. We'll stay for about 10 minutes, if that works. And any Q&A, I'll bring the microphone down. Does that work? Okay. Anybody have any questions for Chief or Dave?
You will say, if you go to the website and sign up for the bottom to subscribe to our newsletter. We try not to overwhelm you, but it's really interesting. It's usually once a month about what we're doing, and we'll have pictures of this even today as well.
And they always stand you so. All right, questions?
Quick and easy question. How far away are the trails and how long does it take to go through them?
It's about 23 miles, and it's right up Route 96 from Waterloo. But put it in your GPS, because it's about 3 miles off 96, and you'll need to take half a day to get there.
We walk on the trail. It's a quarter-mile one way, but you got to come back. But again, there's 9 benches in the quarter-mile. So you need to sit just for a second or so.
You can. If you do walk it, I recommend coming back on the same trail, though there is an area on the outside of it in the main out of the walk as well.
It also has signs by Seneca people, Quakers, women, and African Americans who are affiliated with the Meetinghouse, with quotes from them to give you something to think about as you walk along.
Let me.
So at the not everyone signed, was there extension or just right out of room or what? Why not everyone signed?
The information we have is that there was a unanimous support for all of the resolutions except the 9th one, which was about women being able to vote. So the question, and then Frederick Douglass stood up, thank you, and recognized from his own work as an African American about the importance of the vote, and he convinced people to support that resolution. One of the reasons I think there was a debate was that a lot of these Quakers then didn't vote. They didn't participate in the political system. They were interested in creating a spiritual base in their own activity. So I think they were thinking, well, if men don't vote, why should women vote? And so I'm not sure we want to support this. We have universal suffrage. Otherwise, everyone was impressed with the remarkable civility and calm and agreement among people who were there. Thank you.
So the group that split at the Quaker meeting a few months before the votes, what did they split over, and which group left?
The reformers left, and they were unhappy because the clerk of the meeting accepted or refused to accept, this is kind of Quaker details, but Michigan Quakers and others, Palmyra friends, Williamson friends, were asking that there be no more ministers and elders among Quakers who had any authority over other Quakers, because traditional Quakers would say, oh, that person's a good speaker, we want to enroll them as a minister, and then you were supposed to listen to that person and maybe not. And they were active against the hierarchy that then existed within Quakers, and they carried it into the world, so they were working with what Quakers called the world's people on these reform movements, not Lloyd Garrison wasn't a Quaker. So some of these more conservative Quakers were saying, we don't want to do that. And then these reformers, some of them would come in, I don't know if you've ever been to a Quaker meeting, it's often totally silent. And they would start haranguing the meeting about, what are you doing? How can you not join this abolitionist movement? And a lot of more quietist Quakers were thinking, I came for an hour of meditation, I don't want to be lectured to like this. And so they split. And the reformers were the ones that walked out and formed those congregational friends.
What's the population of Quakers now?
Oh my goodness, not too many. Don't quote me on this. Can anybody Google it? I think there might only be 3,000 or 4,000 in New York yearly meeting. There once were like 10,000 and 20,000 stood there. The numbers have dropped considerably. It's kind of like, Seneca people will say, one of the things people are surprised at is that we're still here. Well, a lot of people are surprised to read about Quakers and Reform movements. Quakers are still here. They're still active. There's several of you I recognize in the audience, even though it's small in numbers. But it's the idea that you do what you can from where you are, even though you don't have a lot of people that you're working with. 75,000 throughout the U.S. 400,000 in the world. Thank you. Yes, the largest number of Quakers today is in Africa.
Hi, I'm Linda Brown from Macedon, and it's reference to Macedon Academy. It's happening that time. The town historians, I've had the pleasure of working with the 1816, as we call it. My question has to do with your timeline. It's been a long time in coming to get to this point, and I just was curious, I guess the question today, when do you think it might be finished? Here I asked that question.
That was a great question to ask, and a hard one to answer. We were supposed to start the restoration of the exterior this year. We ran into a glitch on some site plans and things, which I spoke about. We just had our site plan reapproved. So probably November or December, we'll put out request for proposals and hopefully start the exterior restoration work in the spring. And then, as finances dictate, we'll keep rolling along. Soon, hopefully?
We've been very grateful to receive the National Park Service Historic Preservation Fund has a new category for sites related to equal rights. And we saw that and we said, it has our name on it. Well, we didn't take the first proposal, but the next year they gave us $483,727 who's counting. Yeah, isn't that great? So we took it and we went to the state. You have to match all Environmental Protection Fund monies for historic preservation. We couldn't possibly match that, but we said, look, we have a match. So they gave us just about that, and so we have that money in state and federal funds. And we've been also so grateful to private donors and the Rochester Area Community Foundation for helping us. Nobody's given huge amounts of money, but it has made all the difference for us, and we hope it will continue to be so. Our next big project is trying to raise money for interpretive exhibits after the restoration within the meeting house, so you have something you really want to go see when you get there. And hopefully it'll be spectacular. Thank you.
Any other questions?